most of what goes on with genes is regulation of genes, environmental rate genes are not sitting there with a blueprint running the whole thing. Okay, so when we've uncovered evidence for something being genetic, we're not talking determinism. We're talking utter intertwining with the environment. What's the next thing we figured out? A backbone of all these studies is the notion that you can get two individuals raised in very different environments. And what we've seen there is that's very frequently a problem. Environments can be similar in all sorts of subtle ways, and settings where you think people are raised in identical environments, they can differ dramatically as well. Now, the other assumption that runs through all these studies is one that was sort of intrinsic to the adoption studies, whether of identical twins or the Ketty-style approach of looking at adoption in Denmark and schizophrenia, which is this notion, as said before, that you have somebody who's given birth, and 2 seconds after that woman gives birth, the child is adopted elsewhere. Thus, all the child has gotten from her mother are genes. All that is shared are genes, 50% sharing. There is no shared environment. And the problem with that is the subject of the next lecture, and it's an absolutely fascinating subject, and virtually anybody who plans to reproduce at some point or who is a fetus at any point finds this to be an enormously unnerving literature built around the fact that environment does not begin at birth. If you are a human, you've just spent 9 months sharing a very intimate environment, a circulatory system with your mother. And what we look at in the next lecture are all the ways in which prenatal environment can influence behavior. Okay, so some incredibly toxic prenatal environment which gives you a brain like Swiss cheese. Yes, it can produce changes in behavior. This is not very exciting. What we will see is, number one, some incredibly subtle things that can go on in the fetal environment that can affect behavior after birth. Number two, that can affect behavior after birth all throughout your lifetime, and then even be passed on to your offspring. Inheritance of traits that are not genetic, inheritance passing on of traits built around the fact that you share environment with your mother when you were a fetus. So that will be the subject of the next lecture with some really surprising findings.
Lecture 60, Behavior Genetics and Prenatal Environment.
We are back understanding the biology of human behavior. So we now know about brains, we know about thinking about the genes that gave rise to the behaviors that are made by the brains, thinking about genes in the context of evolutionary theories, evolutionary models, thinking about genes in the context of molecular biology, what actually is a gene, what actually is a change in the gene over the course of evolution, mutations. And in the last lecture, shifting to this field of behavior genetics, how do you understand what genes have to do with behavior in the context of traits that are more or less similar among individuals who are related in the same environments, in different environments, and so on. What we saw in the last lecture was this is potentially an extremely powerful approach, especially with things like adoption